right. Well, if you were with us last time, what a difference a week makes. Last Wednesday it was coming a blizzard, and today it was 65 degrees and sunny. But so we didn't meet last Wednesday night, but the week before we started a new study on the Jewish festivals and how they all point to Jesus Christ. So we started last week or week before last and looked at the Sabbath day. Tonight we're going to look at the Passover. And because the Passover is so important, it's such a big deal, and there's so much there that really points to Christ. We're going to take 2 weeks to look at that. So we're gonna do it in two parts. We're going to look at part one tonight. We'll get finished with as much of part one as we can. We'll see how it goes, and then whatever we don't get finished tonight, we'll pick up next week with part two, and we'll have more to talk about next week as well. So let's take a look then at this festival of Passover, where it's found in Scripture, and kind of a little bit about how it might have been practiced in Jesus' time, maybe a little bit about how it's practiced today, and how all that relates to Jesus Christ. So, as I told you last time, Leviticus is going to be our friend for this. I know that, you're programmed when you hear Leviticus to kind of roll your eyes and curl your jaw because, we think Leviticus is boring, but for this study, Leviticus is going to be our friend. So, there's two places it's recorded that we're going to look at. One is in Leviticus chapter 23, very brief command about keeping the Passover. And then we get a more lengthy description in Exodus chapter 12, kind of where it's instituted. So we're going to look at both of those. I'm going to start with Leviticus chapter 23, verse 4. Leviticus 23, verse 4. These are the feasts of the Lord, holy convocations which you shall proclaim at their appointed times. On the 14th day of the first month at twilight is the Lord's Passover. And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. You shall offer an offering made by fire to the Lord for 7 days. The seventh day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it. So Passover really kicks off this whole festival of unleavened bread. And so they're kind of two separate festivals, but really they're kind of all connected. And so you kind of see that as we work through this. There's a set of festivals that take place in the spring. There's a set of festivals that take place in the fall, and they're usually really close together, and they're connected. And certainly with Passover and first fruits, they're connected because you got Passover and then immediately leading into unleavened bread. That's just a very brief description. We get a longer description in Exodus chapter 12, verse 1. Exodus 12:1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, On the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next to his house take it according to the number of persons, according to each man's need. You shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. Now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and on the lintel of the houses where they eat it. Now this is the original Passover. They're not still doing that after the fact, but this was the original. Verse 8, Then they shall eat the flesh on that night, roasted in fire with unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. They shall eat it. Do not eat it raw, nor boiled at all with water, but roasted in fire, its head with its legs and its entrails. You shall let none of it remain until morning, and what remains of it until morning you shall burn with fire. Thus you shall eat it with a belt on your waist, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. Now the blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be on you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. For this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. For whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day there shall be a holy convocation, and on the seventh day there shall be a holy convocation for you. No manner of work shall be done on them, but that which everyone must eat, that only may be prepared by you. So you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this same day I will have brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as an everlasting ordinance. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at evening you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven shall be found in your houses, since whoever eats what is leavened, the same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he was a stranger or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened in all your dwellings. You shall eat unleavened bread. Leaven, of course, is like, we would say, yeast. It's that which makes your bread rise. And it comes to symbolize sin in all of this. So removing the leaven was, kind of symbolic of removing the sin, that sort of thing. I gave you, in addition to your prayer list and your worksheet, I gave you a little deal tonight on the it's a little reading on the gaining Christian perspective on the Passover feast. It'll give you more details than perhaps we're going through tonight. So that's just kind of supplemental material for you. But we are going to talk a little bit about Passover, what it was, how it was celebrated. So let's kind of dig in and dissect this feast of Passover, because you not only hear about it in the Old Testament, we hear a lot about it in the New Testament, particularly because it was at the time of Passover that Jesus was crucified. And it was the Passover meal that Jesus takes and transforms elements of that to the Lord's Supper. So it has a whole lot to say to us, so we want to take a good long look at that. What time of year does Passover take place? In the spring, that's right. Usually either March or April. Now remember, it varies because Jews are on a lunar calendar. Our calendar is a solar calendar, so their months are always 28 days, and they go by the cycles of the moon. So Easter is always like the Sunday after Passover. So like that's why Easter moves. If you ever wondered, well, why is Easter, some months it's in March and sometimes it's almost the end of April? Well, because it moves because Passover moves. And Passover moves because it's tied to the cycle of the moon. That's how they counted their calendars. So depending on where you're reading in Scripture, you'll either hear it the month of Abib or the month of Nisan. No, that's not Nissan truck, but it is spelt just like that. Abib was a Canaanite month, so if they're using Canaanite reckoning, early on you'll see Abib. Nisan is Babylonian, so anything post-exilic, you're going to see the month of Nisan. It was celebrated in the month of Nisan. Okay, so let's just kind of go over briefly how it was celebrated, and then I want to kind of break it down and do maybe a little more detailed look at it. First of all, this is one of 3 festivals where every man has to appear in Jerusalem. There's 3 festivals: Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles, where every man, every Israelite was supposed to come to Jerusalem, and you were not to come empty-handed. You were to have an offering for the Lord. On the it sort of begins on the 10th day of the month. You're to go out and you're to choose a lamb. Now, this is supposed to be very specific, the parameters by which this lamb was to be. It was to be a male. It was to be not more than 1 year old, but not less than 8 days old. So it had to be a yearling lamb. And from the 10th day to the 14th day, I'm supposed to put that lamb aside. Now, what am I doing from the 10th to the 14th day? Every day I'm going to go out and I'm going to look at that lamb. What am I looking for? Right, any kind of imperfections. Anything that would be an imperfection in that lamb that would disqualify it from being the Passover sacrifice. Because if I find an imperfection, then I have to put that lamb aside and get another lamb, because I can't offer as my Passover lamb any lamb with any kind of imperfection. Now, how does that relate to Christ? He was our perfect sacrifice, was he not? So obviously that points to Jesus. On the 14th day, the head of the house searches out and destroys all leaven. As I said, the leaven is what you put in the bread to make it rise. They were to eat leavened bread. So there's a couple of things this symbolizes. One is leaven comes to represent or symbolize sin, so sort of symbolizing removing sin from your house. Also, it's remembering the Passover itself, because it was eaten in such haste that they didn't even have time for their bread to rise. I mean, that's kind of the idea, that God gives them this ordinance of Passover. He says, all right, you're going to go out, you're going to slaughter the lamb, you're going to put the blood over the doorpost, and you're going to roast it, and you're going to eat the Passover lamb, and you're going to eat it with your belt on wrapped around your waist, and your shoes on your feet, your staff in your hand, and unleavened bread, because before your bread has time to rise, God is going to deliver you. That's kind of the idea. So 14th day, all the leaven is searched for and destroyed. And they got to where it kind of became a tradition where, somebody, usually mom, would leave out a little bit of leaven so that dad could find it and destroy it. I mean, it kind of became I'm going to search out. Well, it kind of became where everybody kind of knew that, okay, well, there is some leaven hidden in the house. Dad's going to find it. Dad's going to destroy it. It just kind of became a way of celebrating that. Also on the 14th day, the lamb is slain by the head of the house. You were supposed to eat it with a company of 10 to 20 people. And the idea was that you were supposed to have enough for everybody to have some, but you weren't supposed to have any left. In fact, if you did have any left till morning, you had to burn whatever's left. You couldn't have it left over. But the idea was that if your family wasn't big enough to eat a whole lamb by yourself, then you would invite someone over to share Passover with you. So if it were my family, if I was doing the Passover and both my boys were home for, they come home for Passover or whatever, and there was 4 of us, that wouldn't be I don't know, the way our boys eat. They might polish off the whole lamb, I don't know, but probably I would invite somebody else. I would invite your family over, and I would maybe one other family, and we would shoot to have, 10 or 12, 15 people to eat the Passover lamb. How many ate the Passover lamb at the Last Supper that Jesus ate? Well, it would have been 13 or 12, depending on what point Judas left scene. He gets up and leaves in the middle of it, so depending on what point, they start out with 13, they end up with 12. So, but that's about the number that they would shoot for. Now, and then they would. This meal was accompanied by singing psalms, and they sang psalms. And if you remember when we did Winter Bible Study and we talked about some of these psalms, and I told you that there was a group of psalms called the Hallel, or the Hallelujah, or the Praise psalms. They were Psalms 113 to 118. So they would sing psalms from this group of psalms. Now, from the 14th to the 20th day, that's the Feast of Unleavened Bread. No work would be done, and there could be no leaven. Can't put yeast in your biscuits for that week. They would have a solemn assembly, like a holy convocation, a holiday, if you will, on the 16th day, and they would make an offering of first fruits to the Lord. And then they would wrap the whole thing up on the 21st day by another solemn assembly. So you had Passover, you had a solemn assembly, a holiday, if you will, the offering of first fruits, and then a week, basically a week of no work and no leaven in your bread, and then you end with another solemn assembly, another worship time. I think it's interesting as we look at this. God not only built into the calendar of the Jews a day off every week, He also built into their calendar built-in vacation time. I just think that's pretty cool. But it was vacation with a purpose. It wasn't, hey, go to the beach. Not that there's anything wrong with going to the beach, but these were times off that had a purpose, that we're going to take time off from work and we're going to focus on the Lord. There's when we get to Feast of Tabernacles, one of my favorite ones. Basically, you go to Jerusalem for a week and camp out. You build you a little shelter and you camp out in Jerusalem for a week. Now, how cool is that? That's a pretty cool little vacation to the Lord right there. Questions on that? We're going to get into a little more detail in just here in a minute. So on each of these festivals, they would, it became tradition to read a small book from the Old Testament. In fact, they would actually keep these small books in one scroll. They called it the Megaloth, or the book of the scrolls, or the book of the writings. But they were small little books of the Old Testament that they would read at these festivals, and each festival had its little book. Now, here's your little Bible trivia. What was the little book that they read during the Passover feast? That's right. Song of Solomon was that. Now, why would they read from the Song of Solomon? I think your opinion. I think your opinion is correct. I agree. I think it is. What book in the Old Testament personifies love more than the Song of Solomon? I mean, and we read it, and it seems to speak of the physical love between a man and his wife, and certainly there's that there. But it also speaks of spiritual love between God and His people, and so I think that's the idea there. Okay, questions on that? On that's just kind of an overview. Now we're going to take a deeper look, a more detailed look at how it would have been celebrated in the time of Jesus. Okay, so let's take a look at this now. So it would have begun, the Passover meal would have begun with the giving of thanks. And it would have been probably the dad of the house that would have handled this. And I'm going to see if I can give you a taste of what that would have been something like. Now, obviously, I'm going to read it in English. If I were a Jew, I would be probably speaking it in Hebrew, but since I'm not, I'm going to do the English equivalent thereof. So he would have stood and he would have begun this way. Blessed are thou, Lord our God, who has created the fruit of the vine. Blessed are thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has chosen us from among all people and exalted us from all languages and sanctified us with thy commandments. And thou hast given us, O Lord our God, in love the solemn days for joy and the festivals and appointed seasons for gladness, and this day of the feast of unleavened bread, the season of our freedom, a holy convocation, the memorial of our departure from Egypt. For us hast thou chosen, and us hast thou sanctified from among all nations, and thy holy festivals with joy and with gladness hast thou caused us to inherit. Blessed are thou, O Lord, who sanctified Israel in appointed seasons. Blessed are thou, Lord, King of the universe, who has preserved us alive and sustained us and brought us to this season. Now, at the Last Supper, who would have pronounced this blessing? Jesus would have filled that role. He was acting as the father of the group at that point. So at that point, you take 4 cups of wine during the Passover meal, during the Passover service, or you'll hear it referred to as the Seder service. If you have Jewish friends and you get invited to a Passover meal, might I suggest calling Uber after you've had 4 glasses of wine? Don't get on the road and try to drive. But 4 cups of wine was part of the Passover feast. So the first cup of wine is taken. This would have been, if you're looking at the correlation to the Last Supper, this would have been not the cup of the Lord's Supper that we commemorate, but the first cup would have been the one found in Luke chapter 22, verse 17. In Luke chapter 22, verse 17, we have that Jesus took the cup, gave thanks, and said, "Take this and divide it amongst yourself, for I will say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes." Then you get the bread after that. We know the normal Lord's Supper order is the bread first, then the cup. But this is, most scholars believe, this is that first cup that Luke gives us in Luke chapter 22. Then you would have washed your hands. Now, here's the interesting thing. At the point at which it would have come to the time to wash hands, Jesus arises from the table, girds himself with a towel, and does what? Wash his feet. So he's taking the whole role further, not only providing a way for them to wash their hands, but he takes it upon himself to wash their feet. He gets to Peter. I love this. Peter's like me. Lord gets to Peter, and Peter says, "Lord, you're not going to wash my hand. No way. I need to be washing your feet. You're not going to wash my feet." And Jesus says, "Well, if I don't wash your feet, you have no part in me." Meaning, if you don't receive this act of sacrifice that I'm about to do, meaning the cross, and receive the cleansing from that, you have no part in me. So what does Peter say? "Well, don't stop at my feet. Wash my head too." Jesus said, "No, you're clean. You only need to wash your feet. But not all of you." Meaning whom? Judas. That's right. So this would have happened at that part of the festival, of the dinner. Then you would have had this bowl of probably salt water, and you would have had some kind of bitter herbs. Now they use things like horseradish, stuff like that. It was something that will not taste good. You don't want it to taste good. And the father dipped his herbs in vinegar or salt water, something that would have tasted bad. And he gives it to the others, and then he removes the dishes from the table, and then the second cup of wine is filled at that point. Then the youngest son, is supposed to ask a question, and it's a question based off of Deuteronomy chapter 26, verses 5 and 8. But how it would have played out in the days of Jesus would have been something like this. The son would ask, "Why is this night distinguished from all other nights? For on all other nights we eat leavened or unleavened bread, but on this night only unleavened bread. On all other nights we eat any kind of herbs, but on this night only bitter herbs. On all other nights we eat meat roasted, stewed, or boiled, but on this night only roasted. On all other nights we dip the herbs only once, but on this night twice." Now all this was scripted. All of this was to set up the father figure to be able to tell the Passover story. Here's why this night is different than all other nights. Now, at the Last Supper, who would have asked this question probably? John. John would have been the youngest disciples. John was also sitting at the, I hope I'm doing this right, at the right, I guess, of Jesus. He's sitting next to Jesus because he's the one that leans on Jesus' breast and says, "Who is it that will betray you?" So he is beside Jesus, and he is the one that's going to ask this question. Now, get this. This is Thursday before the crucifixion of Friday. They get to the point where John asks the question, "Why is this night different than all other nights?" Jesus gets to answer that question. And he answers it not so much with words, but deeds the next day by dying on the cross. Why was that night different than all other nights? Because on that night, it was the eve of when the true sacrifice was going to come. So then the dishes are brought. The dishes are brought back, and they include bread, unleavened, of course, lamb, and herbs. And the Father explained the significance of each one of these, and it all tied to the Passover story. And the first part of the hymn is sung, the Hallel that I was telling you about. Then there's a thanksgiving given, and then they drink the second cup at that point. Then you have the breaking of the bread. And again, this is still not the beginning, and I'm saying according to what most scholars believe, this is still not the beginning of the Lord's Supper. This is the breaking of the bread that is to be eaten with bitter herbs to each person. Now, this is probably when John asked Jesus, "Who is it that will betray you?" And Jesus said, "It's the one," let me read it. I'm in John 13:25. Well, let's go back to 24. Simon Peter therefore motioned to John, to ask who it was whom he spoke. Then leaning back on Jesus' breast, he said, "Lord, who is it?" In other words, who is it that's going to betray you? Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it." And having dipped the bread, he gave it, and I skipped a page, and to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. So this would have been this breaking of bread, not the breaking of the bread and the taking of the bread for the Lord's Supper, but the breaking of the bread with bitter herbs, and he gives it to Judas. Then you have the meat is eaten, the lamb is eaten, and you have the what's called the after dish. It's kind of a dessert-ish kind of thing. It's eaten with a piece of the bread, and it's sort of a dessert, and it's kind of the last thing you eat in the Passover meal. Then the third cup is drank. The third cup of wine is drank. This is the cup of blessing. So you get the blessing and then the dish, and so this bread that goes with the after dish, the I can't pronounce the word acumen, the after dish. The bread that goes with that is probably the Lord's Supper bread. And this third cup, this cup of blessing, is the cup of the Lord's Supper, probably. Now, an interesting thing happens at this point after they take this third cup. Then somebody gets up and opens the door. Anybody want to take a wild guess why they open the door? Yeah, they open the door so Elijah can come in. Why would it be significant if Elijah came in? Right, so it was belief, and it comes back to Scripture that says, before the day of the Lord I will send my prophet Elijah. So there was this belief that Elijah would come before the Messiah. That's why the disciples didn't get it. And the disciples are like, how come, Lord, if you're the Messiah, how come it says that Elijah's supposed to come first? And Jesus said, well, Elijah has come first, and they did to him the same thing they're going to do to me. And it says that the disciples then understood he was talking about whom? John the Baptist. So, get this, the door is opened at this point, but the Messiah is already in the room. How about that? How cool is that? Now, incidentally, Jews still do this practice. They still open the door. I've got a video I want to show you here in just a little bit, where there's a Jew and he's talking about the practice of Passover, and he says, we get to that part of opening the door every year, and he said, I've done it so many times that I've started to lose hope that the Messiah will ever come. And he said but I try to have faith, and every year I just hope that this year when I open the door, Elijah will be standing there, and this year will be the year that Messiah finally comes. And my heart broke, and I wanted to say, Elijah has already come, and you missed him. But it would have been very poignant at the Last Supper table when the door was open. But the Messiah was already in the room. Then you get the fourth cup that's drank. You get the second part of the hymn that's sung, and you get the blessing. And the blessing would have gone something like this. All thy works shall praise thee, Lord our God, and thy saints, thy righteous, who do thy good pleasure, and all thy people, the house of Israel, with joyous song, let them praise, bless, and magnify, and glorify, and exalt, and reverence, and sanctify, and ascribe the kingdom to thy name, O our King. For it is good to praise thee, and pleasure to sing praises unto thy name, for from everlasting to everlasting thou art God. The breath of all that lives shall praise thy name, Lord our God, and the spirit of all flesh shall continually glorify and exalt thy memorial, O our King. For from everlasting to everlasting thou art God, and besides thee we have no King, Redeemer, or Savior. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Questions on kind of that little more detailed view? You may. Yeah, yeah, yeah. The cup of suffering. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I know and I don't have them all. The third cup. Um, I have the third cup as the cup of blessing, and I got that from this book. But however that is, I don't know. But anyway, but yeah, yeah. I mean, it's certainly yeah. Right, right. He tells when James and John are arguing about who's going to be the greatest, and he says, "Can you drink the cup that I'm going to drink?" Talking about the suffering of the cross. They say, "Oh, we can drink it." Well, he wasn't. They didn't even have a clue as to what he was talking about. So, what did it commemorate? Deliverance from Egypt. The offering of first fruits, giving the best to God. I mean, you kind of would see that coming. Spiritual significance of Passover. We talked about leaven. Here comes to represent sin. So unleavened bread, the urgency, leaving quickly, deliverance, redemption quickly. Passover was the Jewish spiritual New Year. Now, they had a civil New Year. That was the Feast of Trumpets. We'll look at that too. But Passover was to be the beginning of the year. That's what the Lord had told them. It was the spiritual New Year. So all things start over, spiritually anyway, at New Year. What did Jesus say? Behold, I make all things new. Now I've actually got 3 videos. One of them is really short. None of them are all that long, but I want us to, we're going to watch the first 2. One is just a goofy little family. They're showing you how to host a Seder service. And I can't remember if that one was first or the other one's first. One is a little more serious look at it. So we're going to watch those 2, and then I have a treat for you. If you'll be good and no talking during the video now.
Ceremonial dinner service usually observed on the first and second nights of the Jewish holiday Passover. It's also a joyful occasion to gather with friends and family. You will need dishes and utensils specifically for Passover, a clean cloth, matzah, a Seder plate with a shank bone, roasted egg, greens, 1 or 2 kinds of bitter herbs, and haroset. Wine glasses, Haggadah books, kosher wine, salt water, a bowl, a kosher meal, and a prize such as candy or a small toy. Optional, a pitcher and bowl. Step 1. Wrap 3 whole matzahs in a cloth and place them on the table, along with the Seder plate. Step 2. Set down a filled wine glass at each adult's place setting. Also give each person a Haggadah, which contains the Exodus story and the guidelines for the ritual meal. Step 3. When all the guests have arrived, a designated person, usually an elder or one of the hosts, leads the Seder. While it is customary to complete all the steps of the Seder, feel free to spend more or less time on the steps you find most or least interesting. Step 4. Recite the Kiddish blessing over the wine. In some families, everyone holds their own cup for the blessing. In others, the Kiddish is said over one large cup, which is then distributed into individual glasses. Step 5. Drink the first cup of wine. Attendees drink 4 cups of wine each throughout the Seder to symbolize the 4 redemption promises found in Exodus. God tells the Jews he will take them out of Egypt, deliver them from bondage, redeem them with an outstretched arm, and acquire them to be God's chosen people. For children or those who prefer not to drink wine, you may substitute grape juice or another beverage. Step 6. Wash your hands, either away from the table or using a pitcher and bowl passed around the table. Step 7. Dip the karpas, or green vegetable symbolizing rebirth, into the salt water representing the tears of slavery. Recite the corresponding blessing and eat. Celery or parsley is often used. Step 8. The leader breaks the middle matzah in 2 and places the smaller half back in the cloth between the other matzahs. The other half is wrapped and hidden for the afikomen, which children will hunt for later in the evening. Fill the second cup of wine. Step 9. The youngest person at the Seder asks the 4 questions, which encourage participation in the ritual. The questions are all meant to explain why this night is different from other nights. Engage people, especially children, in discussion. Step 10. Recite the Passover story found in the Haggadah. Drink the second cup of wine and wash hands as before, this time accompanied by the traditional blessing for washing hands, which can be found in the Haggadah. Step 11. Recite the blessing over the remaining matzah on the table. Each person eats a small piece from the top matzah and broken middle matzah. If there is not enough matzah from the Seder plate to go around, supplement with some from a box. Step 12. Dip the maror, or bitter herb representing slavery's bitterness, into the charoset, the sweet fruit and nut mixture that symbolizes the slave labor Jews performed with bricks and mortar. Recite the corresponding blessing and eat. Then take pieces from the bottom matzah and make a sandwich with a chatzeret, or second bitter herb, dipped into the charoset. If the Seder plate does not contain any chatzeret, you may also use the maror to make the sandwich. Step 13. Eat dinner. Typical main dishes include brisket, matzo ball soup, and potato kugel. Many Passover meals begin with the egg on the Seder plate dipped in salt water, a sign both of mourning for the destruction of the temple and of new life. Step 14. At some point while the adults are eating, the children hunt for the afikomen. Since the meal cannot finish without eating it, it is traditional for the children to ransom the afikomen in exchange for a prize, such as candy or a small toy. Step 15. Fill your cup with wine. Say the grace after meals and wine blessing as found in the Haggadah, and drink the third cup of wine. Step 16. Pour the fourth cup of wine, setting aside an extra glass of wine for the prophet Elijah, and open the door for Elijah. Step 17. Sing psalms and recite the blessing over the wine. Drink the fourth cup of wine. After dinner, eat a piece of the afikomen. Don't eat or drink anything else for the rest of the night. Step 18. The ritual ends with a statement that the Seder is done and the wish that Passover might be celebrated in Jerusalem next year, which signifies the hope that the Messiah will come by then. Step 19. It is customary for some to repeat the Seder on the second night of Passover. Did you know the word Seder means order or arrangement?
On Passover, we have a Seder. Some of us have 2. Seder is a word that literally means order. And in this very elaborate ritual in Jewish tradition, we have different steps, all of which are designed to help us relive the experience of being liberated from Egypt. The Hebrew is Bechol Dor Vador. In every generation, we are called to see ourselves as if we emerged ourselves from Egypt. Part of the way I do that is by having a plate with symbols on it called a Seder plate, and the different symbols each point to a different facet of the story. The charoset, which is a sweet mixture of sometimes apples, sometimes dates, and nuts, and grape juice or wine, is supposed to signify the mortar with which my ancestors built the pyramids in Egypt. It's a symbol of slavery. Among the symbols on the Seder plate on the table are the maror, which is a bitter herb. Sometimes it's a horseradish, sometimes it's romaine lettuce. It's meant to taste bitter to my mouth, just as slavery tasted bitter to our mouths. Other symbols, including salt water, are there, and I take something that is green because Passover is also called Chag HaAviv, the holiday of the spring, where things begin to grow again. And I take something that is a symbol of life, and I dip it into salt water, not once, but twice. And I take it out, and I eat it. In so doing, I recognize that not everything is so fresh and sweet. Our history has moments that are salty and bitter, like tears. So too is life meant to continue.
Okay, let's go ahead and play the door one real quick.
There's a tradition that happens toward the end of the Seder, where you open your door for Elijah the prophet to come and announce that the Messiah has arrived. And I've lived long enough to worry that that's not going to happen. Because I've lived long enough to worry that that's not going to happen, sometimes I don't really believe it. And so I work really hard as soon as the Seder begins to allow myself to really hope. To hope that despite everything I know, the world is going to be better right now. And that when I open up my door, Elijah's going to be there. It's a tradition for some of us to open the door and have the children be the ones. And sometimes to play a game and someone sneaks out and they dress up like Elijah the prophet. But I really, really hope that this year will be the year.
It just broke my heart. I just wish there was some way that we could tell him that Messiah is here. Okay, we're going to stop there because for time's sake, but I have a treat for you. This is matzah bread. There's enough for everybody to have a piece. Oh yeah, and the instructions on the box said open before Sabbath, because apparently if you open the box on the Sabbath, that would be work. And then you can each have one of these. This is the haraset, the little sweet dessert-y type dish that was supposed to represent the mortar that was used in the thing.